Okay, good morning, everyone. So today we'll be looking at the 11th model, deployment and managing infrastructures at scale. So without further ado, let's dive in. So looking at cloud formation. So in cloud formation, you treat your infrastructure as code. So each time you hear of cloud formation, the first thing you're supposed to come to your mind, the first keyword is infrastructure as code. So this means that you provision resources using code instead of using the AWS management console. Like if you want to create an EC2 instance, you would use code. And with this, you spend less time managing resources. Like take, for example, you have many resources that you want to provision, many EC2 instances. Yeah, there are many configurations you need to change, maybe VPCs, subnets, security groups. So instead of maybe creating that individually with cloud formation, you could rewrite the code. And with this, since you spend also less time managing your resources, you have more time to manage, to focus on your application and maybe look at your customers' needs. Yeah. So with infrastructure as code, you provision these resources in a quick, safe, and repeatable manner. So in case if you need that same infrastructure you configured in maybe an AWS region A, you can create that same infrastructure in another region B, or maybe you want to create the same infrastructure in another availability zone. Or why not in another AWS account? So this leads us to CloudFormation templates. So these are resources you use to provision. So it's like CloudFormation uses, with CloudFormation, you can provision and configure resources with these templates. So these templates are written in declarative languages, could be JSON or YAML. Next thing, what's a declarative language? So it's like a programming language that describes what is to be done instead of describing how it's supposed to be done. Like with popular programming language like Python, Java, Node.js, you have if statements, you have loops to help you describe how it's supposed to be done, how you're going to solve a problem. But with declarative languages, it's just written on what is supposed to be done. We're going to look at an example to make it much more easy for understanding. So these CloudFormation templates can be reused. As I mentioned earlier, with CloudFormation, you can have maybe an architecture and you want to maybe use that same architecture in another region. So if you have the cloud confirmation template you use in creating that architecture, so you can simply use this template in another AWS account to get that same architecture, in another region to get that same architecture. So here's an example of part of a CloudFormation template written in YAML. So if you see what we are trying to create here in this template is an EC2 instance. So it gives various properties like the image ID, the instance type, the key name, and many other properties. So if we see, as I mentioned, that it's a declarative language, we see it's just written like what is supposed to be, just written like the steps to create that AWS instance, or rather what is supposed to be created, like we want an EC2 instance. but it doesn't write. There's not anything like how the EC2 instance is supposed to be created. That's why it's called a declarative language. So your template can be saved in extensions. Can be saved. Can have these extensions like .json, .yaml, .template, or .txt. So with CloudFormation, you can use these templates and estimate the cost of your the resources you're trying to provision with the help of CloudFormation. So the changes can be rolled back automatically if it detects an error. With CloudFormation, resources are grouped as a single unit called CloudFormation stack. So, as I mentioned, the template is written in declarative ways. Then you can create, update, and delete these CloudFormation stacks. So this actually means that you're creating, updating, and deleting a set of resources. Take, for example, with CloudFormation, you've written a template like the one we previously had to create an EC2 instance, or maybe two. And later on, you discover that, that instance was T2 micro, and you need T2 macro for your business or your application. That suits your needs, and you want to change it. So there's no need of you creating a new template or just exiting the end template and creating a new stack. So what you have to do is to just go to the stack in question and you update it. Then, the new EC2 instance, that's T2 macro, is going to be created. So with this, with the CloudFormation stack, it enables easy control of a collection of resources. So you don't have to, in case if you created EC2 instances, an S3 bucket, a database, all at the same time, so you don't need to go to the console and click those services individually to change it or update it. So you just use the CloudFormation stack that you created those services and update, even if it means deleting. So it makes cleanup quite easy with CloudFormation. So there's a link here in order to, if you want to read more about CloudFormation. Now let's move on to the advantages of CloudFormation. As I mentioned earlier, it's infrastructure as code. So when you hear CloudFormation, think infrastructure as code. That's the key word here. So CloudFormation, it increases productivity. As I said, you spend really less time managing the resources and you can focus more time on your application. Remember, you can reuse the template, so you don't need to reinvent the wheel and start from afresh. So that increases productivity. You also have, with CloudFormation, it's easy to control and trace changes you make in your infrastructure. Yeah, because as you're deleting, maybe updating the stack, there's history that's been, you have a history of those events. So this CloudFormation is supported by almost all AWS resources. Okay, before we move to AWS Cloud Development Kit, also known as AWS CDK, are there questions or comments? Or maybe I want to hear a hello or a hi. So let me know that I'm not speaking alone.
Hi there, we are with you. Hello.
Nice. Thank you, Sally. I heard Sally's voice. I heard another voice.
Hello.
Nice. Cool. Thank you. Okay. Now, AWS Cloud Development Kit. So this service is used to define your cloud application resources using familiar programming languages. Could be Python, Java, Node.js. So it is a framework for defining cloud infrastructure in code and provisioning it through AWS CloudFormation. So to just explain it further or to give an example, let's use this diagram. So you can have your code you're written in either Python, Java, JavaScript, or TypeScript, and now you've written up you write about your various resources that you need for your application, for example. So it's kind of compiled to CloudFormation. There's a CloudFormation template. Remember, CloudFormation, CloudFormation templates are written in declarative languages, which could be JSON or YAML. So this template, you can run this template, and at the end, you have a stack which comprises of the various resources you wrote as code in your code. So yeah, that's the main idea about CTKs. That's all about it. Now moving further to another service, AWS Elastic Beanstalk. Let's take a step back to cloud computing models, which you probably saw. I think one of the first two lessons, either the first or the second lessons or models you had. So you have on-premises, yeah, you manage everything, servers, networking, everything is under your cap. You're the one to take care of it. Then later on, you have infrastructure as a service. So basically, the cloud provider, which could be AWS, manages the servers, storage, networking, and of course, the building itself, the data center. And you have to only manage the guest operating systems, database, security, and of course, your application. With platform as a service, almost everything except the code for the application, it's managed by the cloud provider. And with software as a service, yeah, you just use the software itself, like Gmail. You have nothing, you don't manage anything, you just have to use the software. Now, I have a short question, or a quick question, just as a recap. Does anyone remember any AWS services that falls under infrastructure as a service? Shout out the answer.
EC2.
EC2 instances.
Cool, nice. Exactly, EC2. It's an example of an infrastructure as code, infrastructure as a service. Yeah. Okay. So let's look a little bit at a 3-tier application. It would be a web application. So you all learned of VPCs in the last module. So you have your VPCs, and inside you can have subnets. So you decide you want to have your servers in the public subnet, and for security reasons, you put your database in the private subnet. You could have the elastic load balancer. You could have auto-scaling groups in your application. But now imagine if you are to use CloudFormation and individually create this and create these resources by your own. That's good. I mean, you don't need to go to the console in order to create them. But as a developer, it doesn't just end there by writing code for an application and later you deploy the application. You have to kind of manage the kind of resources at the back end, maybe capacity provisioning, auto scaling. You don't just leave your application there. So this is where Elastic Beanstalk comes in place. So it's an AWS managed service. So it's a service for deploying and scaling web applications and services. So with Elastic Beanstalk, you just simply upload your code and Elastic Beanstalk automatically handles the deployment of your application. So this would include like capacity provisioning, load balancing, auto scaling, and monitoring of the health of your application. So in summary, you would say Elastic Beanstalk is a service that falls on that platform as a service. So very important to notice or to make note of. Elastic, you have learned EC2 examples of infrastructure as a service. So we have now one other service that falls on the platform as a service, and that's Elastic Beanstalk. So developers are just responsible for the application code they upload and nothing else. And there's also this advantage with Elastic Beanstalk is that the application, the health of the application will be monitored by Elastic Beanstalk. So it's going to publish health events. The health agent will push metrics to CloudWatch. So so this is also an additional feature with Elastic Beanstalk apart from auto scaling or provisioning capacity. It's another use here, another feature. Now, this service supports a large range of platforms like Java, Python, Ruby, Node.js, and so on. And take note that in Elastic Beanstalk, there are no charges. You don't pay for the service itself, Elastic Beanstalk. You only have to pay for the underlying resources your app is using. For example, if you upload your code, in your code, you're supposed to use an EC2 instance, you're supposed to use an S3 bucket. So what you do is at the end of the day, you'll be charged only for these services, EC2, S3 that your application is using. So in brief summary, or to see how it works, so you have your Elastic Beanstalk, you upload your code. Of course, you have to have an AWS console first. You upload your code, the Elastic Beanstalk will do the magic of deploying the services that are necessary in order to run your web application service. And at the end, you have your web application up and running. And this is just like a summary or a simplified version of how the workflow of Elastic Beanstalk. You create your application by writing code, of course. You upload it to Elastic Beanstalk, and the rest is managed by the rest is Elastic Beanstalk that takes care of it. In case if you want to update your app or create another version, you can simply do so. Then a new version is being deployed. And that's basically it for Elastic Beanstalk. At this point, any questions or comments? Or in case you feel I'm a little bit fast, this is also an opportunity to tell me to slow down. Okay.
I think silence means everyone is okay, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. Okay, now AWS Ops World. Before we go into that, let's look at what's Chef and Puppet. A big note, I would say the bar diagram by the side has nothing to do with Chef and Puppet, but Chef and Puppet, these are basically automation platforms that enables you to use code to automate the configurations of your servers. So that's the main thing I would want you all to grasp about Chef and Puppet at this stage, not more, just that. So going back into Ops world, so it's a configuration management service. It uses Chef and Puppet to automate how servers are configured, deployed, and managed across AWS instances or on-premises compute environments. As we see, it's a hybrid service. Why? You see, it manages servers that are both in the cloud, which will be EC2, and on-premises ones. Yeah, it's a hybrid AWS service. So the summary is, you don't need to know more about ops work. What you have to grasp at the end is that this is a managed Chef and Puppet service. Very important to take that Chef and Puppet, yeah, those are separate platforms. They are not, what I mean is they're not owned by AWS. AWS just, just brings these platforms to you for you to use. And with this Chef and Puppet, you can only use, it's just like configured in a way that you can only use AWS services. If I want to just give a simple example of an instance in which you could use Chef and Puppet, is like, take for example, you have your company, you're completely on premises, you're using Chef and Puppet, and yeah, along these years, a cloud consultant convinces you, or you get about the advantages of cloud computing, and you want to move to the cloud or migrate to the cloud, but still you want to continue using these Chef and Puppet platforms. So you'll be able to migrate to the cloud and still use these platforms with the help of OpsWorld. This is a question. There's a question: how is Chef and Puppet different from Ansible? To be sincere, I know Ansible is, I know these are tools used for DevOps, but to be sincere, I don't know the details of Ansible or what that. So fortunately, I can't answer your question, but I see the other instructors. Anyone else have an idea?
I think it will be, not quite sure. I think I'll try to look that I share, but I know it could be on the underlining way that they are written, but they almost do something similar. Thanks for that question. I think we'll share. I'll look for some differences and share. Okay. So yeah, but I'll look for that.
Okay.
It should be just on the listing. Yeah, fine.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just looking at it briefly. It's also for deployment, like Chef and Puppet.
Okay, thank you, Timo. Cool. Now it's time for questions. If you see a blue background, just think time for questions, comment, in case if you have any. I hope I'm not also too fast.
I'm sure as usual there are just new concepts and people are digesting, but yeah, if there is something, please feel free to bring up or at least say something. It's a quiet class today, interestingly, but please feel free to come up with something,
Sure.
or at least always say something, even if you don't have a question.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I also feel that it's not only me and other with on cloud instructors in the cloud, in the class. But yeah, yeah, Sally says all is good. Thank you, Sally. Okay, yeah, but this class, most of the things we're going to be looking at will just be from a high level perspective, so not really into details. You just need to, because with most of these services, you just need to know when it's being used. Oh yeah, like for example, at the moment, if you think of infrastructure as code, the first thing that's supposed to come to your mind is what's the first thing that's supposed to come to your mind when you think of infrastructure as code?
Cloud formation.
Cool. Thank you. So let's go to AWS Systems Manager. So this service manages EC2 and on-premises systems at scale. So like OpsWork is a hybrid AWS service. So it simplifies the application and resource management. It shortens the time to detect and resolve operational problems, and it helps you manage your AWS resources securely and at scale. Yeah, and as I said, it's a hybrid AWS service. Now, moving on to AWS Code Deploy. So this is a fully managed AWS system. It automates software deployment, and it's a hybrid service. You could choose to, for example, upgrade your EC2 servers or the on-premises servers. So yeah, it's independent of Beanstalk and CloudFormation. Just a quick note there in case one thinks that they are dependent, but would look at how code deploy and some other services can be used together and effectively. But most of these are DevOps tools. These are tools that is very handy for developers. So moving on to AWS. Moving on to AWS code commit. Before we go into that, I first want to ask what's Git. So Git is a version control system used to manage and keep track of your source code. Yeah, so of course it tracks the changes in your source code. You can take, for example, there's an application you want to develop. Of course, this doesn't happen. It's not like you be the. It's really, yeah, there's some developers that develop it alone, but you might want to develop it with the whole team, group of developers. Now, so you could use a Git-based repository in order to do so, because with that, multiple developers can work together in a non-linear development. You could host this Git-based repository on GitLab, GitHub, and Bitbucket, the There are other resources as well. There are also other Git-based repositories as well. But let me GitHub, let you see a little bit. I mean, for those that have no idea what I'm talking about, that you have an idea. So this somebody's repository, Adrian Cantrell, it's public. So if I go here, remember I said with Git you can keep track of your source code. It's also with Git you can also know which code was programmed by which developer or which developer wrote this particular lines of code. But it's for Adrian, you just see when it was updated, a short description of what was being done. So you can have history of what was being pushed. Basically, when I mean pushed, it means it's kind of difficult to explain. But if you mean pulling, would kind of means you're trying to get the code itself from the Git-based repository, pushing your the code you programmed locally, you're putting it in simple terms, you're putting it so that pushing it to other developers that they can have access to the code. So let's get a help. And going back to our slides, if you want to learn more about Git-based repository, I would really recommend this link from Hackathon. So it explains, it speaks about, you can read about Git-based repository in simple terms, like how we explain to a 5-year-old. I just wanted to give you a quick introduction or a quick overview of what Git is for people that are hearing this for the first time. So with AWS Code Commit is a fully managed source code service that hosts a secure Git-based repository. So with GitHub is owned by Microsoft. So AWS Code Commit is similar to GitHub. The only difference is it's owned by AWS. So it has version control, so you can roll back to previous changes you made. It's scalable and highly available, and it's integrated with AWS. Of course, it's service. It's AWS own version of GitHub. So moving on to AWS Code Build. So this is a fully managed build service in the cloud. It compiles your source code, runs unit tests, produces artifacts that are ready to deploy. You can deploy right now, of course. So with Code Build, it eliminates the need to provision, manage, and scale your own build servers. And how it works, you just specify the location of your source code, choose the build settings you want, and Code Build will run scripts for compiling, testing, and packing the code. Now, AWS Code Pipeline. So it's a fully managed and continuous delivery service. It helps to automatically build, test, and deploy applications in the cloud. So code pipeline, you can deploy applications to EC2 instances by using code deploy, Elastic Bean, AWS Elastic Beanstalk, or AWS Upwork stacks. So to have a visual view of how code pipeline works, so you have your AWS code commit, which we looked at. You can have your code in which you push it so that other developers can have access to it. Then the code build will build your code, and it also could be used for testing. Then after that, you could deploy your code in production. Now, these are individual services, and imagine having to click, you use code commit, you push your code. Then after, from then, you have to manually click for your code to be built. Then after, you have to manually click to deploy your code. So in order for you not to do that manually, that's where AWS code pipeline comes in. So with code pipeline, you can choose that, okay, when would your pipeline be triggered? Let's say each time you add more code, each time you push more code in your repository, so automatically your pipeline will be triggered and automatically it's going to build. In case of testing, it's going to test in the code build, then at the end, deploy your application. Yeah, so it's like an architecture, which you can see that. So yeah, in a particular region, you could choose, first of all, a region, then your developer will push code into code commit. You can trigger the pipeline that each time code is being, you can give us settings that your pipeline could be triggered by newly pushed code, then immediately will be built. You can use the CloudFormation template in your code pipeline. Before, yeah, of course, maybe for deploying other resources or provision resources, other resources, CloudFormation could be them. Could use CloudFormation. Then, yeah, you have, after building, you now have your different resources in different regions, of course, created by CloudFormation. To know more, if you want to read more about this application, there's a link here. It's from AWS documentation. Now, moving to AWS Code Artifact. Excuse me for a moment. Okay. So it's a secure, scalable, and cost-effective artifact management service for software development, deployment. Yeah, so that's the main thing beside code artifact. I know we've gone, it might sound a little bit overwhelming with all these services I've mentioned, that yeah, most of them I instead looked very into details in other certificates, like in the developer certificate, it's much more in depth. But just at the practitioner level, you just need to understand when the services are used, or it's in the scenario in which you can best use this service. So that's it about code artifact. Let's look to AWS Code Star. So we have looked at code deploy, code build, all these services that start with code. So what's CodeStar? So it's a cloud-based service for creating, managing, and working with AWS software development projects. So this makes with this service, it makes it easy to set up AWS services like code commit, code build, code pipeline. It's true with code pipeline, you could automatically trigger the service, your code to be built, to be deployed. Now with CodeStar, it provides like a unified interface for you to manage all of these services, or the chosen range of AWS services. So before we move further, I think with some questions or comments. Okay. So AWS Cloud9. So this is a cloud-based integrated development environment, abbreviated as IDE. So take note, it's a cloud-based IDE. So it enables you to write, run, and debug your code using a browser. So it's other IDEs, you have Visual Studio Code, you have Eclipse, but AWS Cloud9 is like the one that's cloud-based. So it's, the AWS version is AWS own IDE, of course. And with Cloud9, it enables real-time collaboration of code. You have many developers working on the code. So with Cloud9, all developers that you're working with, of course, given that you've given them the permissions, are going to be able to see your code in real time as you program. So that's it for the developer tools. At this stage, are there any questions? This is an opportunity for questions.
Or maybe comments. And one thing I just want to emphasize for everyone is, like I said, we said earlier in the beginning of the course, the key thing, especially with the practitioner, is learning the services and knowing what they can do. So that's why we see so many services, especially for this particular model. And the key thing is, for example, when you learn like AWS Cloud9, when we have this service, I know there will be a few people who may want to know how it works, but if you have to deal with that, it's kind of like, at the moment, it may be too much for the course itself. How they work, that's covered much in partly in the solutions architect associate and especially in the sysops. And then when we are doing the labs, you have the opportunity to meet most of these services. So the key thing is, like, when you see a service like this Cloud9, you should be looking for the key terms, right? So it enables you to write, run, and debug your code with just the browser, and then real-time code collaboration, because you may always see in the exam they may be looking for an IDE that will give real-time code collaboration. because once you say IDE, immediately goes to write one code to say, in this case, in a browser. And then the other positive thing about it is enable real-time code collaboration among developers. So for every service that you come across, we're looking at key terms. And that's why I keep saying that you should always take a day. You should always take a day and make sure that you learn at least one service. It's the only, I don't think there is any other way you can, everyone goes through it. So you just have to take your time. These are services that fall under code deployment, code provisioning, resources, provisioning resources or deploying your code. So you can group, if you remember the AWS service file I shared, I hope everyone remembers it. If not, check on the Google Drive and make sure you download that, where all the services are grouped. Let's say for compute, for security, and for billing and pricing, because the reason they are grouped like that is for you to be able to study the services in groups, because that kind of help you a little bit. So when you think of security services, you can then know where they are. You can then try to figure out what a particular security service does. And if you want to be much better, you try to figure out why is one security service different from the other. When you start learning that way, it helps you, because at times they will bring a question and all the services will look similar. But if you did study with trying to figure out what are the differences between the services as well, you'll be much more better off. So my recommendation remains, when you get up in the morning, just pick one service or two, try to look and see what you know about them, what you remember. If you're going back in the evening, maybe before to bed, after you study, you pick again another one or two service. If you do that continuously, especially we still have a month before the exam. If you have not been doing that, if you are doing that 4 services a day or 3, if you are mastering them, in 20 days, you will pick quite a good number of them. So I agree with Sally. There are many services. You say the chef and puppet service concept is not clear. Can you throw more light on it? You want to go back to it. I just shared the link about what chef and puppet. Yeah, it's just mainly, you also use that for kind of you use that for developers, system administrators use that for creating resources, right? Servers and managing servers. So Chef and Puppet existed before the cloud. So these are not really native cloud services. There have been services that were existing even in the on-premises model, where if you look, for example, the issue of because virtualization existed right in the traditional IT, where you have to manage so many virtual machines, right? So there's something that was already going on, especially through VMware. But then the challenge with managing many virtual machines, which are also servers, was there. And the point is, you look at Chef, Puppet, or Ansible, they are all used into managing virtual machines on premises. But remember that even the cloud, you have EC2 instances, which are just virtual machines as well. So that's the same. So moving to the cloud, you had AWS service that is used in doing that. And I think someone was asking what's the difference between this service, and as mentioned, it's basically on the script. If you look at Ansible, the language that you use to write is Python and YAML. The others use Ruby, and Chef use Ruby, and Puppet also use Ruby. So in regards to So yeah, Chef and Puppet is automation platform that enables you to use code to automate the configurations of servers. So managing, creating, and deleting, and updating them as well, right? So that's really, but so the difference, if you are, so Chef and Puppet, for Chef is a separate service. Chef is, and Puppet is also a different one, and all of them perform the same thing. It's just that they are written, the script that you use to write them is different. And some administrators would prefer to use Chef, some would prefer to use Puppet. That is in traditional IT. Yeah, so you just think of it as a form of, you use that to managing servers. So when we talk about managing servers, the creating of the servers, the updating of the servers, and the deleting of them. Yeah. So when you are moving to AWS, as you have on screen, AWS created a service, OpsWalk, that kind of so if you are coming from traditional IT and you have been using Chef and Puppet, and then your company maybe start using AWS and you are looking for a tool that is similar to Chef and Puppet, you go for AWS OpsWalks. And this is always a very popular question also, maybe during revision and maybe could be in the exam. They may always want to know, yeah, if you which service in AWS, for example, will support Chef and Puppet, you know. I don't know if that helps, Sally, or if there's still more to add here.
It does, but I was just wondering, because looking at all these services, it is now that you've said that we are just learning the services to go for the exam, but I was wondering how are we going to do the practice. It means we're going to do all of this without practicing, going to the console, creating an EC2. We're not going to do that, right?
For the practitioner, we focus just on this because the practitioner is kind of an introductory course. When we start doing the revision, we could touch on maybe VPC, but working on something like OpsWorks detail, it will be just too much. But that's why we say that immediately you finish with a practitioner course, you are now qualified to attend the Tuesdays and Thursday sessions of the labs, right? Because your studies, if you are planning in the cloud, even on cloud, we say the minimum certification that puts you in a good position is the associate certification. So the practitioner is more of like introducing you to the different services. We do not many labs, but then after that, once you finish with the practitioner in all the services, you can then now start attending the Tuesdays and Thursdays sessions of the labs where most of these services come in. So when you go there, they don't have to explain to you what AWS OpsWorks is. So you just, before starting using it, right? Yeah, so yeah, as you say rightly, we don't really do much hands-on at the practitioner.
Okay, everything is clear now. Thank you.
Yeah, but definitely, the thing with all the services you see now, you see them in Solutions Architect Associate, you see them in the Professional Architect. So the services are not good. It's not like when you go to Solutions to start doing the Solutions Associate Architect, the Solutions Architect Associate, you will start learning new services. The beauty is, if you know these services now and you understand what the concept behind them is, once you move to the other levels, they'll just do it a little bit in detail. You have in the SysOp, we'll do more hands-on. In the professional, seeing how all of them can be used to build complex architectures will come in. So the services, most of them will introduce, the introduction of new services will not be many. So these are like fundamental services that you'll find that you'll be using them always. So you learn them once now, you're introduced to them now, and then you always work with them. So challenge, yeah. Yeah, someone saying something? Okay, I think that was just, I put that, Christian, I put you on mute. Yeah, I hope that was in the background. Yeah, so, yeah, so like I hope after explaining, but I think just so like Chef and Puppet, as I said, it was used in traditional IT. And then if you are moving to AWS and you are looking for a tool for Chef and Puppet, it's AWS OpsWorks. But then you should know what that will mean, what that will do, you know. And as you explained, it's a hybrid AWS service. That means you are using it in, you can manage EC2 instances, because remember we did talk about a hybrid cloud where there are some companies who still prefer to leave some services in their data centers on their own premises, but then there are some other services that they'll be running in the cloud, right? So when you have that, now the challenge for developers or system administrators is now they have servers that are running in the cloud and some that are running in their traditional data centers or on premises. So what always happens is developers will prefer to use just one tool to manage them. They don't want to go to the cloud. They're using a different tool. And then when they're coming to look at all the other servers that are in the traditional center, they're using a different tool. Because it means that they have to master and learn two tools. So when you see a tool like AWS OpsWorks, it means that you can manage servers, EC2 instance here. When I say servers here, I'm meaning like EC2 instances that are located on the cloud. And then you have also servers or virtual machines that are located on premises. So they will use the one tool and they'll be able to do that across. Yeah. So that's a hybrid service. It's working in the cloud and it's working also on premises. And there's in the examinations, there's always this trick question trying to figure out, you know, you may have a question where you are looking for a tool to manage or that works in this kind of way. So understanding when you study a service, especially some of the service you have seen here, I think Code Deploy is another service that, can you please go ahead? I think where you had Code Deploy. Yeah, I think when you think of Code Deploy, you see it's another hybrid service, right? But remember here is upgrade EC2 servers on premises servers. So these are the kind of key words that you can be looking at the practitioner level. Look at the service, know what it does, and then pick out some key things. But this will become much more clearer when we start doing revision. You'll be seeing, the familiarity or the structure of how the questions for the practitioners are, and that will be helping you go back to your notes and knowing where to pay more particular attention. Yeah. Okay, that was just a rundown from my end. Any worries again or questions?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Yeah, I think no questions. I don't see comments either on chat. So you have, I don't know, please continue if you have more.
Sure. If people don't have questions, I have my own questions I brought.